Welcome to the Training Box, the show that interviews the top experts from the world of fitness, nutrition, and health as they share their stories and expertise to help educate and inspire you to live a healthier life on purpose and with purpose. My name is Stephen Box, and I am your host. And today I have a special guest for all the fellas out there, especially you guys who love to get your golf game going. I have Hickey from Deep Health Discovery. Thanks for joining me, Rye.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Appreciate it, man.
So tell me a little bit about how did you get into fitness, man? Like, give us a little bit of your background here.
So, how did I get into fitness? Well, it would have began back in my childhood. I had just a very health conscious mother who was a nurse. She was very much ahead of her time with regards to nutritional awareness and just kind of really hammered it home. I was the kid that was, busy at school trying to trade my fruit in my lunchbox for puddings and such with other classmates. So it was a grind in the early days, but very much resonated and made me the man that I am today with regards to caring so much about proper nutrition and health.
Okay. So what point did you maybe transition from just your own health to realizing that you had a passion for helping others?
Yeah, so that transition would have happened a little more recently. I mean, I completed my precision nutrition certification back in May of last year. And so I took my time with that. I've been working in sports nutrition for a while, but to really hone in on your question, it would be realizing that for so many years I had friends that looked up to me to for advice on fitness and nutrition and what to eat and how to move and to be quite honest, just it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more information that I gathered, the less that I realized I knew. So I just sort of committed to going down this path of acquiring an actual certification or education, and I just haven't looked back. I get so much fulfillment out of positively impacting other people's lives. So
It's interesting. You mentioned about how the more that you learn, the more you kind of realize what you don't know, and I think that's something that a lot of people, when they start getting into trying to get healthier, they start to figure out. They're like, man, there's all this stuff out there, there's all this information out there. Then I thought I knew, but now they're kind of overwhelmed by all the information out there. So how do you help people really sort through all that information and figure out what's right?
yeah, it's a good question. It's like the imposter syndrome, right? So I think that how I help people is different from that stage because it's almost better with regards to clients if they have more of that imposter syndrome, because most of them, as you're likely familiar with, the average person who gets their information with regards to nutrition from media outlets and documentaries and just blog articles and whatever else, they're going to be in that early stage of the Dunning-Kruger effect and actually think that they know a lot more than they do. So how I combat that is just basically leveraging the precision nutrition concept, never trying to convince or hammer in a particular concept that I may know is in fact true or just a way better approach than what my client has been motivated to do based on one of those outlets. So helping them do it better and then ultimately coming to the conclusion that it probably wasn't the best call, whatever that may be, and then helping them sort of transition into that phase throughout our time together, where they might go, whoa, okay, there is a lot more to learn here. And that individual who I trusted and believed, who was so certain about this one particular approach, maybe they're not so, versed in the science. So
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, a big part of that is, when you really buy into a particular method and you're like, okay, this is the answer for everything, then you start to then look for evidence that that's the thing, right? And the consequence of doing that is that you stop looking for evidence that anything else could be the thing. So it sounds like what you're really saying that you do with people is you don't necessarily discourage them from trying what it is they want to try. You just try to help them to see the other evidence that's out there and realize that there might be an alternative method that might actually be a better fit for them. Is that a pretty good summary of what you're saying there?
very good. Yeah. And it boils down to kind of more of a life concept that I've recently really connected with more than I ever have. And it's that we're, as humans, so good at imposing our own bias on everything that we see. So our own perspective is so tainted with our own bias based on everything that we've experienced up until that point. So what you just summarized there is perfect, because applying that concept in my mind also allows me to branch outside of that coaching mentality where you go, oh, this is frustrating. Why does this person want to do this? I know that's not the way that they should be doing it. And instead, it allows me to go to appreciate and understand that the reason why they've been convinced by that is understandable. And I don't know what it's like to be them, and I don't know what information resonates. And I've, just, this is one field that I've invested way more time into researching and sourcing out a good quality education like precision nutrition. And this, I could be the guy. It's the same reason why I don't go and try and give financial advice or other kinds of things in fields that I'm not aware of, because I know that same sort of concept and it applies, and my bias can really taint how I perceive the world in other industries.
And I was trying to look up, there's a specific name for that syndrome that you mentioned where we have a tendency to think that other people's ability to understand something is less than our own ability to understand something, right? So we think we've got it all figured out and that everyone else is just blind to the truth. And that's something that I think has really hurt the industry that we're in fitness and nutrition, because there are honestly a lot of people out there that they take advantage of that fact, and they will come out and they will promote one single diet or one way of doing something as being the ultimate way. But I mean, in your opinion, is there really a such thing as an ultimate way, or what is your kind of philosophy on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the short answer is no. And I would totally agree with everything you just said there. There's a couple key things that I think is the cause of that, is that we both know that nutritional science is a very difficult science to study because, well, for a multitude of reasons. And we also, as humans, we want simplicity. We want to just be, it's way easier to be told what to do. We know that there's issue with the way that we're currently approaching nutrition for the vast majority of North Americans in particular, but globally, as the Western touch tends to spread throughout the world. So, we're not succeeding at this point. There's all kinds of chronic illnesses that could potentially be avoidable and all of that. And we want to just be told, do this and don't do that. But the unfortunate side of it is that we don't really know, or that there's no one approach for everybody. We're so unique. And the simple example I like to use with clients that has resonated with some and not with others, but I mean, there's a reason why, I could go eat a spoonful of peanut butter and it's going to be delicious and I'll be fine. And, it's arguably a decent source of fat for me. And the next person can literally have like a touch of that or of a peanut on their tongue and they might die from anaphylactic shock. So if that doesn't highlight how different human physiology is, I don't know what else does.
Yeah, it's weird because I think a lot of times what people will do is, they'll say, oh, this works for my friend. And there are certain principles that we can apply across the board, right? But when you really get down to it, there are a lot of differences as well. So even though the basic principles work for each of us on an individual level, we have different needs, and not even just from a physical standpoint, but even our lives. Because we all live different lives, we all have different stressors, we all have different things going on in our day to day that have an impact on our health as well.
Yeah, big time. I could have said it better myself. It's why the one-on-one coaching concept is unfortunately for many people the way that you have to go if you really want to get to the bottom of what is going to be most effective for you, because the blanket approach in terms of one dietary style or method of stress reduction or all those other, sleep, for instance, all these other components of a holistic health model, they're just so individual, and they have to be addressed. It's just unfortunately a lot more difficult and complicated with people than we would like it to be.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I know with you is you've got a background in golf. You actually got a scholarship to play golf, right?
I did, yeah. I went and played at a Division II satellite school of Texas A&M, so it's Texas A&M Commerce.
So I know one thing a lot of people have this kind of image of is that athletes require, special nutrition, that they're somehow vastly different from the average person. But what are some things that you can, maybe share with a non-athlete that, is things that you've learned from working with golfers?
It's that I would say what works for an athlete, aside from maybe looking to peak in their performance with regards to a competition or having to make weight or something else, what they do and what allows them to, an athlete, to succeed and be healthy outside of those specific circumstances is exactly what the average person does. There's a much smaller gap between those two than most people think. So I think the way I look at it is you have two sides of the spectrum where you have certain clients who are going to, or just general population folk who are going to think that that gap is going to be significant. And if they want to become that athlete who's just reasonably lean and healthy, it requires an insane training schedule and a very strict meal plan and all these other things that we've seen through media and other sources that athletes do. And so with that particular case, a job as a coach would be to say, hey, realistically, it's not as crazy as you think. It takes time to get there in order to build the skills to do that consistently, but they're not as robotic as you think they are. And, strict meal plans are not a necessity. again, aside from those very specific circumstances. And on the other flip side of that, you have individuals who sort of perceive themselves as upper end athletes, and they very well might be. And so what they think they need with regards to nutritional guidance is this crazy elaborate athlete focused, meal plan. Again, the strict approach, when I'm sure you and I have both experienced, you go through and you start gathering the information, the feedback with regards to what they're doing consistently, and you realize it's the very basic stuff that they're not doing consistently. So they actually need to sort of step out of that mindset of I'm a insanely elite athlete and need a very, very, very structured program. Again, that's going to differ from person to person, what resonates with them and what doesn't. But in that case, my job would be to sort of pull them back into that world of, listen, you might not need this crazy approach. It's just the very basic skill sets and habits that you need to start trying to do more consistently.
Yeah, I like one of the things that you brought up there is the fact that a lot of athletes, that their basic habits really aren't that good. They struggle with the exact same things that we do. It's, people think of, oh, athletes, they're able to be consistent and they're able to do all this stuff, but they struggle just as much as we do. The only difference is they have the money and the time freedom to literally have someone be there pretty much 24/7 to say, okay, do that, don't do that, do this instead. They actually have the ability to afford to have somebody to actually do that. Whereas the average person, you're probably only going to see your trainer for, a few hours a week at most.
Yeah, I would agree. And on that note, I mean, with an athlete, you have some cases where their output is just so extreme that they technically can maintain this reasonable physique or what athletic composition that they have just on account of how much they're moving throughout the day and the physical strain that they put on their bodies. It's not optimal, but they're, like you said, you can, there's cases of Olympic athletes who maybe couldn't afford, from smaller countries, couldn't afford better nutritional coaching and whatever else, and finally someone gets a hold of them. They're eating fast food all the time to fuel their workouts. So yeah, it's the basics that really work for the vast majority of us.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because a very common phrase we hear in the fitness industry is you can't outwork a bad diet, and I think athletes proved that with the right genetics you actually can outwork a bad diet. It just requires a whole lot of working out, and we're not talking about getting on the treadmill at the gym for 2 hours. We're talking about 10 to 12 hours a week of really intense exercise, something that the majority of us are not going to have the time to do.
100%.
So now, in terms of golf, because I know we got some guys out there who they maybe are just recreational. They're not trying to be professional golfers, but they want to up their golf game a little bit. So what are some of the muscle groups and some of the exercises that you try to have people focus on in order to improve their golf game?
Well, in most cases, my target audience is going to be golfers who need to lose a little bit of weight. So what I've found, I mean, I wouldn't be specifically focusing. I mean, core is going to be a massive one with regards to golf. But if I look at a client and I see that they're packing around anywhere from 20 to 30 plus extra pounds, the amount of strain that losing some of that weight alleviates on their lower backs, and if we are able to strengthen their core a bit and even just freeing up some flexibility, that that carrying around that excess body weight otherwise wouldn't allow. That's where the biggest transition or the biggest sort of light bulb moments are going to go off. And yeah, I don't, at this point, I'm not dealing with any professional golfers or golfers that even want to be, aspire to be professional, but I do deal with golfers who love the game more than anybody, and some that are, quite high level amateur golfers, and they just want to play the game longer. They're going to be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and recognize that they want to be doing this into their 60s, 70s, and maybe even their 80s, hopefully. And that is achievable, but you have to look at it from taking care of your body first. Those lessons that you're taking, and the hundreds of balls that you're pounding out at the range is not going to get you anywhere long term if you're letting your health suffer and not providing sufficient recovery and nutrition to your body.
So for you, so it's not really about focusing in on a specific muscle group or anything like that, but it's really more that whole health approach. It's really kind of like what you would do with any client, in all honesty. But the difference obviously would come maybe as they lose that weight and then try to develop some muscle and things like that. It might become a little more specific, but in the beginning, is really just like you would treat any client who has some extra weight to lose. Am I understanding that correct?
100%. Yeah. And that stems from my own experience. I've never been, super overweight, but I've been bulky and chunky, and golfing while I'm doing that and is just not fun. You're dealing with all kinds of aches and pains, and it's also, again, tough to validate, but most likely not the best approach in terms of longevity. So what I think have struck a nice balance for myself of being able to strength train, build muscle, maintain a relatively lean physique while keeping up my flexibility and improving my golf game. So yeah, you nailed it on the head there, Stephen. I don't take a super specific to this muscle group approach. If I see something lacking in a particular client where they, are unable to hold a plank for 20 seconds or are dealing with tremendous lower back pain, that's where I'm going to leverage my network of professionals who are, like a physio or someone who's going to be more versed in those types of fields. But in general, just providing your body with better nutrition, and then that resulting in some weight loss and having a decently healthy body composition, it improves everything.
Okay, awesome. So I want to kind of switch gears on you here for just a second. So I know you work with a lot of guys, and there are obviously some needs that we as men have that are a little bit different from the ladies, and especially because as men we have a tendency to bury a lot of emotions, and we will end up being more stressed out, or we tend to snap at people more or whatever because we are repressing a lot of that stuff. What are some of the things that you see with the guys that you work with? Like, what are some of those issues that kind of bubble up that you see?
You said it, man. It's suppression of those types of things. And I'm a big proponent of taking steps to improving mental health, and again, taking this very holistic approach. And with me, if I'm in the position of being a coach with a particular individual, it's going to be having that awareness of where I can help and where I might need to pull somebody else in. So that might look like, if it's drinking or something, and you might need to pull another professional from within your network in. But yeah, I think you nailed it on the head when you said that we tend to suppress stuff. As men, there's a difference between being stoic and then just not expressing emotions and pushing everything down and making, having that internal dialogue of, if you talk about that or bring this up or act in such a way, that you're not a man. So those are tough things to navigate, and I'll forever learn about navigating those better. And it kind of comes full circle with what we talked about earlier with regards to our own bias and not knowing what that other person is going through. So it's going to be easier for others. Meditation's a big thing for me. It's a chronic practice that I've implemented into my daily routine, but I'm not just pushing that on all my clients. That actually will push certain clients away. There's a stigma around that with certain men in particular who, if I say you should meditate, they're going to turn away and run. So it's got to be a gradual progression towards that. Hey, maybe do you want to try some breathing exercises? You seem pretty stressed out, and what typically helps you deal with that better? And maybe it's going for a walk or something like that. So it's these gradual progressive steps that ultimately you can hope to connect them with that side of, hey, meditation, deep breathing, this kind of stuff. It tends to work for most people.
So, Rob, one thing that I find, interesting and, looking at a lot of the research that's out there right now is a lot of the stuff that's about helping men from a psychological standpoint when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because like you said, a lot of us, you start talking about, recognizing emotions, and the immediate thought process is, oh, that's not very manly. Um, because we think that getting connected with your emotions means you have to all sit around in a circle holding hands and, cry, which is not the case, but that's, I think, what a lot of guys visualize for it. So, I mean, obviously, we're not to a point where we have answers for these things yet, but I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on what are some of the things that we as fitness professionals can do to help move this idea forward of helping men better cope with mental uh, illness or just even stress, which I think leads to a lot of this mental illness.
It's a good question. I think if I were to try and think of a short answer, it would be to seek help. And that's a strong phrase to use, but again, knowing where your scope of practice lies. I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a counselor, and I don't play one on social media either. So it's one of those things where getting over that hump of knowing that if you go see someone for counseling or therapy or whatever, it doesn't make you a weak person, it actually makes you a stronger person. That's a massive, massive hurdle. And again, it's very contextual and difficult to arrive at that for men from different walks of life. So it's a tough question. And just like nutrition, there's no one perfect answer. It's going to be so nuanced and specific to each person and their own particular journey. But I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to take those cases and try and coerce or guide my clients towards that ultimate, wherever that is, that ultimate pinnacle of being okay with seeking that help or getting vulnerable and talking about things. You rarely feel, I mean, think of any conversations you've had where you got deep and you got vulnerable. How many of those did you feel worse coming out of? And for me, I know, again, this is my own bias, so I don't know, it might be different for others, but it is always therapeutic, always for me.
Yeah, and I think that for the most part, we're not really designed to do life alone, right? I mean, if you look at humans as a whole, we are designed to do things within a group and have a support system. So I know, for us specifically, I kind of feel, you know, there are obviously, boundaries to what we can do as fitness professionals, because like you said, we're not psychologists. But what we can do is help people with their body, and we can help people to, change their overall health. So I don't know if you maybe have some personal experience with this, or if you can maybe share some examples of some clients that you've had, or where you've had people that maybe they mentally, not necessarily had an illness, but just their mental health wasn't as strong as it could be. They maybe felt insecure about themselves, or they lacked a lot of confidence, and getting in shape was able to change that for them. Do you have some stories like that you can share?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my own experience would be a decent one in that it's a funny sort of entry into health and wellness that I think a lot of people have. And I got into lifting weights at a young age for the wrong reasons. It was purely aesthetics and insecurities and wanting to, having an older brother and his older friends having that influence on me, me just wanting to be bigger. And I mean, it all stems from very standard and typical insecurities throughout adolescence and being a teenager and whatever else. And that ultimately, again, different for everybody, but it can transition into really connecting with the super healthy components of nutrition and health and wellness and weightlifting and whatever else. So it's yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question there, Stephen, but it's more along the lines of yeah, it's so, I find it so difficult to talk about. I'm so cognizant of, again, there just being no blanket approach. So I can only speak to my own personal experience and other good ones that I've seen within clients, and having had clients, men in particular, who have gone from sort of like someone who would not think meditation is cool and run the other way, to seeing me do it and me being open and vulnerable about how much of a tremendously beneficial impact it's had on my mental health and how I perceive the world. And eventually them going, okay, there's this, you know, bald bearded, fairly muscular Viking looking dude who's willing to like sit down cross-legged and do some deep breathing. Maybe I should consider doing this. So for me, in those circumstances, if I can, those are the most fulfilling cases with regards to my coaching career, is when, if I'm able to like inspire people to do that, or even just connect with one person through a social media post or whatever else, and inspire them to book a counseling appointment or try meditation or whatever else. I mean, that's amazing.
And I like the what you brought up there, because it's like, I see a lot of times where people who generally are into a lot of things like that, whether it's meditation or whatever, they don't necessarily tend to be the guys that we picture as being the manly men, right? It's usually like some really scrawny guy, and you know, he just doesn't fit the image of what most guys are thinking about that they want to try to get to. And so they lose that inspiration. So I do think it's kind of cool that, like you said, someone like yourself, that maybe you have that image because you got the bald head and the beard thing going. So it gives, I think, a little bit more credibility that, like you said, people can look at that and go, well, if he's doing it, it must not be as uncool as I think it is, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. So I think it's going in the right direction, and if I can play a small role in that, then that's amazing.
So, Ryan, tell me, in terms of your personal system here, what if a client wanted to work with you? Because you mostly do online training now, right? Do you still do in person also, or are you just online now?
Just online. That's
Okay.
correct.
So if someone wanted to reach out, they wanted to work with you, whether it was just for general weight loss, or maybe if they wanted to improve their golf game, or whatever they're coming to you for, what would that process look like for them? Like once they contacted you to get, consult set up or whatever, kind of take me from there. What's the process look like that you walk them through in the beginning?
Yeah, it would be essentially my motto in the early stage is gather as much information as humanly possible. So I want to really paint the story of my clients. So whether that's typically, I leverage the Pro Coach platform from Precision Nutrition. So their intake questionnaire is incredibly helpful. And I also have created some other Google Forms that I'll send as well, because there's some questions that I like, further questions that I like to uncover. So yeah, the process in the early stages is I want to essentially understand that client as best as I possibly can. And I spend a lot of time reflecting on that. I book time before to prepare for calls and following calls where I have just quiet time to reflect on the notes that I've taken, and again try and take off that bias approach. The moment that I think, oh, this is what this client needs, I'm really cautious with that and aware of when I make that snap judgment too soon. And I want to be able to connect with saying, hey, Rye, maybe this isn't why they're coming to that. And then having a new set of questions, or even following up with a text or an email or whatever, saying, hey, I forgot to ask this. I mean, that starts to build this connection with the client where it just can't be achieved without a coach that is empathic and truly wants to understand what their client is going through. So that's a long answer, but essentially it's gather as much information as possible. And then from there, the direction we go next is going to be so different for every person.
So just to kind of bring that back, and maybe for those out there listening, I want to kind of try to put this from the perspective of a client, and let me know if I get this right or not. But if I were to come to you and I'm like, hey, Ryan, I want you to coach me. So you're going to, send me some initial intake forms, try to gather as much information as you can. Now, I know the forms you're talking about, since we use the same technology platform, but so I just want everybody out there to know that you're not going to really get buried in paperwork when he says this. It's a I feel like it's a good length. It's just right for you to be able to get enough information about somebody, but not so long that they're going to be overwhelmed by all the forms and everything that they're going to get. And once you get all that information, now you want to take the information and look at places where maybe you feel like you could make some assumptions, and you want to ask further questions about those, and you want to make sure that as a client that I'm actually getting really personalized service from you, because you're going to make sure you really understand where it is that I am. You're going to want to make sure you understand where it is I want to go, and you're going to want to understand what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, and then we're going to work together to come up with a game plan on how to get me to that next level. Is that a pretty good summary of what it would look like if from the client perspective?
Very much so. Yeah, that's
Okay,
perfectly articulated.
cool. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people kind of have it from that perspective as well, because I know there's a lot of coaches out there that kind of have this mindset. We touched on this a little bit earlier in talking about the specific diets. If somebody's only teaching one protocol or whatever, where it's kind of this whole my way or the highway kind of thing. And I think it's really great that we have coaches like yourself who are really starting to come along and say, hey, it's not about me as the coach. Like my own personal health is about me, but when I'm coaching clients, it's not about me. It's not what works for Rye. It's what does my client need, and developing those relationships are really important to you. It's something I could really tell. So I think that having coaches like yourself come into the industry is a really fantastic thing for us overall.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
So do you have any advice that you want to give to any guys out there who are really struggling with their health right now, and they've tried everything, they've tried doing it alone, and maybe they have some success, but they put weight back on, or maybe if they're struggling to put on muscle, they just, no matter what they do, they just can't put on the muscle. I mean, obviously, call you for a consult is the first piece of advice. But outside of that, just give me maybe two or three your top tips that you would give to people just for general and fitness.
Yeah, for general, I would say if you're doing it yourself, the more that you can connect with long term, the better. So progress, whether it's building muscle or losing fat, with the fat example, you didn't gain that weight that you've gained over the last 20 years in 30 days. So the more that you can connect with not expecting to lose that weight in 30 days is a tremendous benefit to you. So connecting with the long term, identifying your goals, and connecting as best you can with why you want to get there. So again, Stephen, with regards to most coaching processes, particularly the ones that we take, it's really connecting with the why and building that story. And I think that's a common thing, that we all have these very sort of shallow, not shallow, but just broad level goals, like lose X amount of weight or build X amount of muscle. So if you're not going to seek out help, that's okay. I mean, you can do some Googling as well with regards to figuring out how to set those better goals. But then beyond that, I mean, it's always simple in theory. It's like, eat more whole foods, load your plate up with fibrous vegetables, eat lean protein. These are all things that most people would know. And again, unfortunately, it's clouded with people who preach about carbohydrates being awful for you, or keto being the only way, or veganism, or whatever else, and insert fad diet here. But there's general concepts, like you said, that everybody would benefit from, but it's a matter of figuring out why you want to do them, and sort of building the skills that'll allow you to do those consistently.
So a couple of things that you said there that are interesting. So one is, and I hope that people didn't miss this, but it's about being consistent. And it's not about learning new stuff, or in a lot of cases, it's not even about learning what to do, because most people probably have a pretty good idea what to do, but it's the actually doing it part, and it's doing it consistently. And if you can do that on your own, great. But if you can't, then that's when you should definitely hire a professional to help guide you and help you be more consistent with it. So that was the first thing that really stood out to me. The other thing that really kind of stood out in that is that we all have a tendency to kind of gravitate towards something that works for us, right? So it's, oh, I did this before, this is what I did all through my 20s, and I was always able to lose some weight doing it, or whatever. And I think, just like we're talking about, it's important as professionals that we don't just lock into one thing because clients have different needs. I think it's equally important that clients actually sometimes be willing to forget about what's worked for them in the past and accept that their bodies may be different now, especially as we get a little bit older, and that things that used to work for us won't work anymore. And we need to be open to some new approaches.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. And what I love, just to sort of spin off of that as well, is that even if you're right, bodies change and that approach that worked back in the day might not work now. But even if it does, connecting the client with, well, where did that get you long term, right? It's like if hey, the client says, you know what, I cut out carbohydrates and I lost 20 pounds. It was awesome. So should I just, hop back on that train again? Because now I got 40 to lose now. And so in their heads, bridging that gap between like them thinking, well, I know what works because this worked for me in the past. And even if it would work for them again, it's like, is it sustainable? Did it work for you long term? Then they start to think and they go, oh yeah, no, shoot, that actually didn't work. And in fact, it got me into a worse spot than where I started. So that's, I think what you just said there is so important.
Yeah, I like the way that you rephrase that too. That's I think really useful for people to hear that it's not really about did you get results, because a lot of times I think we think of it as either I got results or I didn't, and the fact of the matter is you can get results, but if they don't last, you didn't really get results. So so
100%.
So I'll tell you what we're going to do real quick before we wrap up here. I'm going to give you a chance to tell everyone how to get in contact with you. But before we do, I have to take you through the lightning round. So I
Sure.
don't know if you've happened to have seen any of the videos where we did this yet or not. But I'm going to ask you three questions, and you're just going to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Sound good?
Roger that. Sounds good.
All right. So your first question, tell us where you live, and if someone were to come visit you, what is the one restaurant they absolutely have to go to?
Ooh, I live in Vancouver, BC, and I would say I'm a simple dude. We would go down the street here and go to a place called Fresh Bowl. It is amazing. It's like a Thai-based noodle or rice bowl. It's delicious.
Okay. So what is it that got, how did you get into that? Is there anything particular that made you like Thai food, or it's just tried it on a whim
Well,
one day and loved it, or what?
yeah, no, I've been to Thailand. I do love Thai food, but this place for me, my fiance and I love to just walk down there on a Friday and grab a Thai bowl because it's very fresh. It's like kind of like that, I hate the term, but cheat meal, so to speak, that you feel great after. It's got loads of veggies and it's light noodles and it's just like a guilt-free sort of indulgence for us.
I like that a lot better than cheat meal. A guilt-free indulgence. That sounds a lot better than cheat meal.
I like it too. It's better, yeah.
All right. So next question. One book or quote that has really impacted your life.
It would be a quote. Many books have impacted my life. I'm going to say the quote is, the best measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him no good.
Okay. Who said that? Do you
I
know?
honestly don't know. I don't.
We'll call it
But
anonymous.
it resonated with me way, way back. And it just made me think, really connect with doing the right thing when nobody's looking, essentially, is what it means to me. So,
Okay. All right. So final question, and this one will be an easy one for you. Tell me about. I'm making sure I'm reading this correctly. About quad tandem biking.
yes, quad tandem biking, a field in which I know much about. So, the brief story is I have three amazing friends. We have a nonprofit foundation and we own a 14-foot quad tandem bicycle that was custom built for the four of us. And I've rode the bike with three others from Canada all the way through the US down the coast into Mexico, believe it or not, in 2014. This thing is a fundraising machine. The most recent ride we did was in 2018. It was a shorter ride. We actually raced 4 British guys also on a quad tandem from Portland, Oregon to San Francisco. So that was only 2 weeks, but we raised money for mental health. So mental health is very near and dear to my heart. It's a cause that I, you know, as we talked about, I incorporated into my coaching practice and think it's a very important issue to break the stigma on. And so I'm going off on a tangent here, but quad tandeming is very near and dear to my heart, and I wouldn't recommend it. Anybody try it. It can be quite grueling, especially on these long trips, but also very fun and rewarding.
Very cool. Well, hey, man, appreciate you joining us today. For anybody who wants to reach out and ask you any questions or possibly talk to you about some coaching, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can shoot me an email at DHD Nutrition, so like Deep Health Discovery Nutrition at gmail.com, or check me out on Instagram. My handle is DHD_RY.
All right. And you have a website for your business?
Yeah, it's deephealthdiscovery.com.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us, man. Really enjoyed conversing with you today. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any questions that you want to ask Rye, feel free to drop those below. I'll make sure that he sees them and get you an answer to those questions. So as always, thank you all for joining us today. I will see you next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode of Training Box Tuesdays Health Podcast.